that in essence then simplifies or makes it easier to understand why we do the things we do is for only one thing. It's for our students.
You're 100% correct.
And if these Transformative 10 strategies improve our student success, then that's all that matters.
That's right. David, I had a great experience today. We saw a lot of great data-based presentations, which I think you just keep learning more and more about how to use data and how to activate it in your schools. And I think that's an important piece. And I think the keynote today was great about talking about how to activate that. And so we had a great day with listening to those.
Perfect timing for us today, as from our Chief Academic Officer. I was in a session today that had talked about using data protocols to look at data. We just finished writing a data protocol because we didn't have a common data protocol for all our schools. What was interesting was the data protocol that they used had a lot of the same sections and information that we had incorporated into our data protocol. So that was great, uplifting for us.
Yeah, you're on the right track.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. Yeah, David, Schiller Park School District 81 has been on a journey for quite a few years with NWEA and using MAP and its data to improve school performance and student performance. And they really evaluated our school district and kind of came up with these 10 things that determined maybe why we're having such great success at our school. Because I think everybody does them, you just don't know you're doing them and at what level you're doing them at. And so it gave us an opportunity to really kind of evaluate how well we're doing each of those as well. So one of the things that really stands out for us is we're lucky within our scheduling to be able to provide 2 intervention blocks, which is supplemental, learning opportunities for our students. And we do 1 block for math, and we do 1 block for ELA. And that has been really important to the success of our students because not that they don't get great teaching within their core classes, but each child needs to have that targeted instruction at the skills that they're missing. And, we use the MAP data to help us guide that, determining what the children need and how to give it to them. And so that's been really great for us.
Yeah, that's interesting that you looked at that and you think that you didn't and you found out those things because that leads you to what you want to do next or how to improve. And the fact that somebody looked and said in the knowledge that, hey, you're doing well, why? Did you think that you knew you were doing good? Did you have any idea on why you were doing good?
It's a great question. When you triangulate data, right, we're not just looking at map data, right? It's a great point, data point for us, and we do really well there. But when we start looking at the state test, we don't, in our math, we see the correlation isn't there. So we do really, really, really high in math and MAP. And then in our state testing, we drop off a little bit. Now in ELA, we kind of see it consistent across the board where we're at both. And so there's more of a correlation between our reading scores during MAP testing and our state testing. So that's been an identifier for us. So we're just kind of on that quest of trying to figure out why are we doing so well here with math with NWEA, but we're just struggling a little bit with the state test. And so, and in the state test itself, they've been working on adapting it and changing it over the last few years too. They're trying to figure out the right formula for the school districts as well. So there's been a little adjustment there. But so I think it's really, we identify some strengths here, and then you have to identify your weaknesses. And the great thing about it I heard today was you're not placing blame on anybody, right? It's not about blame. It's about what are we going to do to fix it? What are you going to do to help everybody achieve higher? And I think that's what we're trying to do. And what's your school district up to? I know you guys are fresh into this process, and you're kind of looking at how to use these Transformative 10 items, and how do you guys utilize those in your school district?
Well, what's interesting, where I learned about Transformative 10 was attending a NWEA webinar on the Transformative 10 that was held last fall. I believe it's when it was. And my CAO office, Chief Academic Officer, myself, was attending that. She was in her office and I was in my area. And as I listened to these Transformative Tens, I'd say, we do that somewhat. Well, yeah, I think we might do that. So as soon as the webinar was over, I ran straight to her office. And I sat down with her and I said, Louise, I think we do some of these. And she said, yeah, I think we do some of these, but I don't think that we do them effectively. And I guess what was the most important that part of that Transformative 10 was that we are a charter school system in St. Louis, okay? And at the time, we had 5 schools. We're consolidating. We're going to 4 next year. But so that was interesting being a charter school. And it was struck me as if these are the 10 strategies that a successful charter school was implementing, that perked my ear being a charter school system. So do we do these? Yes, no, maybe, somewhat. How effective are we at these? So that's how I learned about the Transformative 10 and how I got to thinking about how can we figure out how we do these.
Yeah, that's great. I think we were lucky, right? Because we had NWEA come into our school and they kind of set the parameters for the Transformative 10, right? And now I wonder, what are you guys doing to do you have an evaluation process in place to help you, when you look at each of those steps, how do you determine if you're meeting that step or that strategy? And because I think it's one of the areas that maybe our school districts might need to go back to and say, okay, we have these in place, but are we doing them still at the same level we were a few years ago? So I'm just curious what you guys are doing.
I come from a research background, chemist by nature, and then research, that type thing. So the first thing that popped into my mind was, how can I find out what are we doing these? How can I get a pulse on this? So the Chief Academic Officer has once every 2 weeks or so an instructional coaches meeting, and then about a week later, a principals meeting. So what I did is I went into the instructional coaches meeting with a survey, Kahoot. What I did was I read each of the transformative strategies by the 3 themes that they were organized in. I read Transformative 1, and I asked them to rate it. No, not at all, not yet, somewhat, maybe, and I forget the last one, all the time or whatever, okay? What I found out then was I did all the instructional coaches, got their results, turned them into a pie chart. Then the next week, I asked our principals the same 10 questions, the same Likert scale. Now, this is important, I deliberately designed that Likert scale to meet our observation walkthrough form Likert scale, because my thinking was that triangulation of data, like you mentioned, if our observational form is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and it's supposed to be measuring, are we doing high quality instruction, then that should show up in NWEA growth scores, right? It should. Okay. So I did the survey for the principals. And then what became absolutely eye-opening was the difference in the pie chart side by side. And that's what I'm going to be covering on Friday in our presentation. And what the eye-opening experience was that the principals and the instructional coaches, out of 10 questions, I say they only what you could call agreement on 1. You might get instructional coaches saying we do this 25% of the time, principals say 75% of the time. It was just absolutely eye-dropping, jaw-dropping on that they were not in agreement. There was no sync in what the instructional coaches thought we were doing with the Transformative 10s, and again, what the principals thought we were doing with the thing. So that led us to the other thing that we looked at was, after we talked to instructional coaches, the next thing we asked them was, why do you think your results are why do you think we're not being as effective, okay, in these strategies? And we came up with a list of themes that we identified that on what they thought we could do better to be more effective use of these strategies.
And did that come closer together with the teachers and administrators on that?
Yes,
Were they closer together than that?
because we use an intervention to win time, which was one of the transformative strategy small group, and I think what they came to terms with, yes, we do that, but maybe we need to do that more effectively.
Yeah.
Okay. Principals they thought, well, maybe we need to give a little more time for the win time. Instructional coaches, we might need to spend a little more time with the teachers on how to use it effectively. And then one of the themes was depends on the teacher, because some teachers have buy-in, some teachers might not have buy-in on the use of data.
I don't know if your school has that opportunity to use an intervention type of system as well, but for us, getting the teachers to buy into the importance of that time is so valuable, so important, and that's been a great piece. We have a tier intervention program, just like St. Louis does, tier 1, 2, and 3. You get your enrichment kids, you get your kids that are doing okay but need a little bit of push, and then you got your strugglers at the bottom a little bit that just need a little bit more individual attention. And what's really important is to use current data all the time, real-time data, to determine what intervention those children should be getting and what intervention they should be in. But in order for those to be effective, you have to have teachers that are willing to really crunch data all the time to say, all right, they were in tier 3, but they're really making some big growth here. We need to move them, and we need to make sure they're getting what they need next and move them into tier 2. And if those tier 2 kids are really moving, we got to bump them up. And if you got a tier 1 kid who's really struggling with that enrichment stuff for them, and they're not keeping up, then we got to drop them down too. So you really kind of got to make that adjustment in real time. And we are all in school district, so every teacher is involved. I have PE teachers that are jumping in intervention blocks and teaching math, that are teaching language arts intervention courses. And so our teachers really know the importance of what they're doing. We too have, we have those programs where kids can sit in front of the computer and do a little bit of work, but we ensure that our teachers are using that time really well, right? Like you can't do great papers while kids are still working on something. If they're working on something and getting it wrong, then it's not benefiting them, right? So, our teachers take turns, or they take time in the classroom where, yes, a group of kids are working on a computer. I take a different group of kids and I'm working with them individually. And so now I have a small group. Well, I have 20 other kids over here doing whatever, Khan Academy or whatever it might be, right? And then they rotate that, give me 10 minutes, give me 15 minutes, and we rotate groups, And then at the end of that, again, it's a additional work for teachers. And a lot of my teachers take it home. They look at the numbers all night and they reassign the work that the kids need to do the next day. And it's a ton of work. Teachers put in a ton of hours and they work really hard. And if you're not, the intervention becomes ineffective.
Yeah.
So what do you do? How do you get your teachers to buy into that? And then how do you give them the breaks they need? That's the other question, right? I don't know what you guys do, but we try to do a lot of fun things throughout the school year. I'm really lucky to have a great staff at my school and in the district, and they come up with all these crazy antics, every week, and whether it's a coffee bar during the week or push a cart around the building with treats and snacks and drinks for the teachers. We sometimes give gift certificates of, an extra 30-minute plan time. And so the administrator will go in the room and do their classes for them while they take some time off. So being creative to kind of reward or to honor the hard work they're doing, I think is an important piece. I don't know if you guys have dived
We do
into
some of that
but-
and starting to do more of that. And we're starting to do more of recognizing and rewarding from the resource office down. Another one of the transformative 10s involves student ownership, okay? And that's one of the things in our observation form measures student ownership. Do the observers see student ownership? And that's one of the ones that more lined up with instructional coaches thinking that we were doing that transformative 10, which is really interesting because I was at a couple of sessions today that talked about student ownership using their NWEA data. And I also did a study from the data from our observation protocol and took that data from our observation protocol, observation walkthrough forms, and compared that to the NWEA growth that for our midterm benchmarking, and did a Pearson correlation, a statistical correlation. And what I found out was that for some of our schools in the math correlation, we got as high as 0.8, a little over 0.8 Pearson correlation, which is significant correlation between our observation walkthrough form and our NWEA growth data for several of our schools. So what that allowed me to do is show our chief academic officer, but what it allowed me to do is to support what we're trying to show from our district level to our schools and principals and instructional coaches that NWEA is valid, okay? That the idea is if we're doing our observational walkthrough to improve high-quality instruction, to improve student ownership, to improve things like that in the classroom, then that should act, like I said before, show up in our NWEA growth data. And what was really interesting was that it did. It was a correlation in 2 out of our 3 schools for math. But now on the flip side, I had a negative correlation in one case. So that really is eye-opening what's happening there. Mm-hmm. Because on the one school that had a negative math correlation, they had the highest RLC, reading language comprehension correlation. So that's that triangulation of data, but that's also a way that I can reach out to our principals, down to our instructional coaches, down to our teachers. You are making a difference. Yeah. These walkthrough forms are improving it. It is supported by our NWEA data. That's why it's so important. Yeah. So those are just some of the effects that from watching that Transformative 10 webinar that we've been able to look at and show that what we're doing is working in our NWE scores. So now we just have to look at all 10 strategies and put a plan to be more effective at all of them.
Yeah, that's great.
One of the things that we're going to focus on next year, beginning this fall, is when we bring our teachers back, we're going to do a data day. They're going to actually use the U-Data protocol and look at data. But one of the things that we want them to do, we have 2 schools that have the same grade levels. And what we want to emphasize this time is that across the grade levels, how are they doing on the NWEA, the growth, okay? Yep. If you're third grade here and third grade here, if you have different growth, it's not a bad thing. We just want to use that across grade levels, both horizontal and vertical, the growth of using NWEA data to help them learn from each grade level, each teacher, that type thing. And I'm not sure which strategy that is, but...
Yeah, David, I think you're hitting strategy 4 where you're sharing students and strategies across your grade levels or across buildings. So it doesn't matter how you're sharing it or where you're sharing it, but you're sharing that everybody's involved in it.
That's going to be a focus this fall and this next year for us.
I love that. For us and our school is, I think, we do really well at differentiating over a course of a unit. And I look at our self-paced math program when I look at the differentiation strategy, which I believe is number 5. We're seeing great success in that self-paced math program. We're lucky to be in New Orleans and have an opportunity to present that here. But we're going to continue to strengthen that self-paced math, and we're going to try to keep motivating that into our other science and language arts classrooms to try to get kids the opportunity to learn at their own pace, and that I don't have to just stay where I'm at because not everybody else is ready to move on. Or, I need a little bit more individual attention while somebody else can be more self-directed. So we're going to really focus in on helping our language arts program, our writing program, science, to see if they can't get that same success by using kind of the pieces of the self-paced model, because it doesn't always fit together, right? Math is a little bit different than ELA and science, right? But we're hoping that they can take some of the pieces of that formula and have great success in their classrooms next year.
One other thing I'd like to ask you, and you're going to have to help me with the strategy again. But one of the things that we have found that our teachers are not doing very effectively, and that is teaching multiple strategies throughout the same unit. They look at maybe where their students are coming in, and they start focusing on this strategy and this standard, and then they forget that there's other standards that they're supposed to be covering in that unit. You have any advice on how to teach that strategy more effectively?
So strategy 7, teaching from multiple standards at once. I think it's kind of that same thing I was just talking about, using some of that self-paced, allowing kids the opportunity to work at their own rate, making sure that teachers are identifying what each student in their classroom needs at that moment in time, and making sure they're moving each kid appropriately through their curriculum so they can achieve their own success. And I love this morning when they were talking about with the keynote about let's put a little sticker on the top of their sheets of paper to show that they made that achievement, or printing out their certificates to let them know they made the mastery of their content.
That's true, and it's really true. I've been in the corporate world before, and those little notes, little stickets, little things like that, we all like that little recognition.
100%.
And I think that that's a good way to get teacher buy-in. If you recognize your teachers, you recognize the students, and that in essence then simplifies or makes it easier to understand why we do the things we do. Is for only one thing. It's for our students.
You're 100% correct.
And if these transformative 10 strategies improve our student success, then that's all that matters.
That's right.